A quick ad before we begin. Mubi is a curated streaming service dedicated to elevating great cinema from around the globe. And you can get a whole month free at mubi.com/girlonfilm. More on that later. I'm afraid of literally everything, to the point that I once crawled home after my legs gave way while crossing a very tall bridge. When I was 23, I didn't leave my house for 3 weeks because I was scared of being hit by a car. I would lie paralyzed in bed when I heard branches on my window, convincing myself that it was the sound of an intruder. From highway crashes to stalkers to spiders to air travel, I just find a lot of stuff terrifying. And that's why I found Beau is Afraid a deeply upsetting and difficult watch. But it's also why Beau is Afraid is a film that truly changed me. Whether you've seen it or not, you're probably aware of its absolute madness. It is a film with seemingly nonsensical horrors and twists and surreal sequences and imagery. The film was wildly polarizing and sent many people scurrying to Letterboxd to leave reviews claiming that Aster was in over his head and had fallen victim to unbridled creative control. At first, I felt similarly, unsure how the director had ended up creating such a hollow film, one that looked like it was trying to say so much, and yet I couldn't figure out what it wanted me to feel at all. Until a few days later, it clicked. This was not nonsensical abandon for the sake of it. This was a premonition. So let's discuss, what does all the madness mean, and what ultimately is the point of Beau is Afraid? I'm hoping to make things a little more casual, a little more chill today. I've been going through some personal stuff recently and I feel like I've been a little bit tense in my last few videos. So I want to have fun. I want to have fun today and talk about anxiety and depression and fear and death. Woo! And importantly, before we go ahead, this is an analysis. It's my tasty little opinion built on watching the film, feeling some feelings, and reading some of Aster's interviews. I hope you enjoy it. Nothing is real. Now, Ari Aster is, as we all know, a psychopath. He described this film as a comedy, and I would like to kindly disagree, because this movie was not funny to me for a single second. And I know that's me at the end of the day translating the film through my own experiences, because as the filmmaker, his view on it as a quote unquote nightmare comedy should rule supreme, especially if you believe in the notion that the director's intended meaning is the only meaning, or the only one that matters. Oh no, I have toothpaste on my tit. But whether you read the film as a comedy, tragedy, or drama, Beau is Afraid is fundamentally, and perhaps obviously given the title, a film about fear. And I feel that the key to understanding it is interpreting the events through Beau's lens, not as a movie intending to move its audience through a hero's journey or towards a pivotal plot twist, but as a movie that's plainly exposing and exploring how a person riddled with fear sees the world, and how fear is not only a response to one's environment, but an element that shapes it. So let's start there. It's Pennywise. Pennywise coming at you with the what is that? So coming at you with the Detox coming at you with the slow verse. Fear on screen is presented in a plethora of ways. Given that most horror films are trying to frighten us, they include the frightening imagery that their characters are exposed to. They have their reactions and we, the audience, have our own reaction. And Beau is fascinating to me because depending on you, the viewer, it might not hold any terror at all. I know there was some disappointment around Beau is Afraid not being a straight horror or a more horror-adjacent film as it was expected, given Aster's previous offerings. But with Beau, fear isn't the intended outcome. It's what is under observation. While fear obviously pops up a lot in the horror genre, films about fear can tend more towards drama. Good Will Hunting, Stranger Than Fiction, Batman Begins, Yes Man. They all present fear and anxiety in slightly different ways, mostly as an underlying blockade to moving on that doesn't have a drastic physical presence. But where these films have mostly uplifting outcomes, Beau has no such luck. And of course, there are plenty of films that fall more in the horror genre that deal with specific phobias or typical fears like The Strangers, Open Water, and Arachnophobia. Films of this ilk don't often end positively, and they put their focus on making the audience feel afraid too. They aren't about the lesson, rather the viewing experience. Shout out to a recent French film called Infested, which is about a spider infestation in a rundown apartment block. I braved my way through it, even though real life spiders petrify me. I actually thought it was brilliant and it had a lot of layers, so I highly recommend it. As someone who considered moving to Iceland because of its low spider population, that is saying a lot. But instead, I moved to Australia. What am I like? Back to Beau, this film sits in a unique place of combining fear as a subject matter and fear as an audience experience. And what does fear look like to Aster? Aster is a filmmaker who makes many references to his influences, frequently shouting out to Ingmar Bergman and Hitchcock. Boo. His films commonly ruminate on familial relationships, mental illness, and grief. For Beau specifically, Aster and the film's cinematographer, Paul Pogorzelski, highlighted several films that influenced them in an interview with IndieWire. 1976's Playtime, 1954's Rear Window, the 1964 film A Matter of Life and Death, and 1991's Defending Your Life. Because of this interview, these films get thrown around a lot as Beau's core influences, but reading the article, it's clear that for the most part, these influences were aesthetic and tonal rather than thematic. I'm so sweaty. Oh, and I just wiped off my lips. The one that stands out as an influence on the story specifically is Defending Your Life, a romantic comedy written and directed by Albert Brooks and starring the Meryl Streep of drag, Meryl Streep. It presents the afterlife as a trial in the city of judgment. This description, out of context of its light-hearted tone, immediately brings to mind the final scene of Beau is Afraid. But journalist Jim Hemphill calls attention to the overall similarities. Hemphill writes, "Like Defending Your Life, Beau is Afraid is ultimately a philosophical meditation on how our lives are defined by fear and an inquiry into whether or not we can conquer fear or grow from it. Brooks' film is ultimately life-affirming and romantic, where Aster's is brutally pessimistic." Pessimism is a running theme in Aster's horrors. Hereditary is undoubtedly pessimistic and paints a devastating portrait of grief and inevitable tragedy. What is more pessimistic than a world where you can't escape your fate? Put a pin in that, because we're coming back to it. Midsommar has a sheen of toxic positivity, finishing with a smiling Danny and swelling orchestral score, but it masks the deeply pessimistic truth that she is still deluded by a dangerous relationship. His worlds are consistently hopeless. Creating an atmosphere of fear rather than singular moments tends to make a more lasting impression on viewers, and I think this is consistent with his filmography. While his films have some shocking imagery and surprise turns, he doesn't rely on jump scares or gore to get under our skin. He builds really tense environments, like the family home after a tragic avoidable death, an isolated community of strangers with strange rituals. The tension hangs in the air rather than being distilled in a shocking moment. To give a clear comparison of the opposite, I feel like Teens Camping in the Woods, a la Wrong Turn, or even the Friday films isn't an environment or situation that provides tension and discomfort in and of itself. Being lost in the woods, different story. But just teens in the woods is easily also the setting of a teen comedy or romp. A family home during the grieving process of the youngest child is not. And Beau is atmosphere to a T. His overall situation of getting to his mother's funeral without money or transport is stressful as hell, and each and every sequence is pure anxiety. The apartment building being destroyed by an unruly mob. No thank you. Being blamed for the paint drinking. No. Having someone car kick during standard bouncing. No! During the weed smoking scene in the car with the two teenage girls, I had to stop the film because I started having a panic attack and I didn't know if I wanted to keep watching it. The cruelty and relentless misfortune was overwhelming. Asta also describes the film as a comedy about ambivalence. And interestingly, he explained in an interview with W magazine that the first iteration of Beau was more cartoonish and arguably funnier because it was really only concerned with being funny. This changed as he meditated on the script during COVID, but rather than intentionally drive the story in a more serious direction, Asta says that Beau's themes appeared organically over the writing process, which is something that you know I'm a huge believer in if you've seen my Immaculate video. Asta said, I don't pull up a chair and think like, okay, what's the theme? Gradually that kind of becomes clear, but it's not usually the impetus behind something, like I want to make a film about guilt. It sort of dawned on me, oh, all of these ideas are all collecting around this thing. On the humour of the film, he adds, for me, the funniest jokes tend to be either the saddest or the most upsetting. I don't know, I guess that's gallows humour, right? This is so f***ed up to me. It obviously resonates with other people, but yeah, gallows humor, not my cup of tea. I still can't get over the fact that he calls this a comedy and that a load of reviews and reviewers call it a comedy. And I know I'm possibly unusually sensitive, but I don't think I so much as smiled once throughout the entire 3-hour runtime. In general, Asta's version of fear is twisted, humorous, pessimistic, and impartial. It doesn't care that you've had a bad day or are in need of a helping hand. And throughout the film, we see that Beau's fears include young people being filmed or observed, kind people turning on him, being chased, being framed. This film takes every opportunity to highlight human cruelty, something I believe sits at the heart of anxiety, or at least my anxiety. This belief that humans do not see ourselves in each other, that we don't fundamentally have faith in or love for or care for each other. To synthesize all these ideas, Asta explains that it's about guilt and anxiety and ambivalence more than almost anything. According to the Cambridge Dictionary, ambivalence is the state of having two opposing feelings at the same time or being uncertain about how you feel. Merriam-Webster describes it as simultaneous and contradictory attitudes or feelings, such as attraction and repulsion, a combination that I am very familiar with. Ambivalence was not a theme that jumped out at me, despite Asta centering it in discussions of the film. I can see the dichotomy of Beau desiring love from his mother and also fearing her, of wanting to stand up to her but not wanting to rock the boat, yada yada, as stemming from this. But I think discerning what Asta really means here comes down to how he describes ambivalence himself. I think ambivalence is a very particular kind of hell. I wanted to make something that was very seriously about that. It's about an unlived life. It's about somebody that was really trapped. This idea of being trapped is key to Beau's worldview. Stuck in a dark pit, not knowing whether the way out is left or right. We're now taking the pin back out because this is where pessimism comes back into the picture. Pessimism is key to fear because it believes that there is no light at the end of the tunnel either way. Above all, Asta's vision of fear is inescapable for Beau and for us. It's a sequence of vicious events that has you hoping for a reprieve, but it also sets itself up as a film that will never offer that. Everything bad that could happen does happen. But significantly, everything bad that could happen does happen, not because there is logical in-world reasoning, but because Beau believes out of pure fear and anxiety that it will. Beau believes that everything is a conspiracy, that everyone will betray him, every paranoia will come to pass. And this brings in the idea of inevitability, another core trait of anxiety. This is emphasized when Beau watches footage of himself at Grace and Roger's house, seeing scenes that are about to occur on their television in advance. Beau already believes that he is locked into this future, and the footage is a display of this mindset. The evil is inevitable. The cruelness of the world is inevitable. Another shot early on shows a mother snatch a toy boat's remote controller away from her son, only for the boat to flip, which foreshadows the themes and almost directly mirrors the ending of Beau is Afraid. And this is incredibly important because it tells us from the get-go that the boat was always going to flip. Perhaps because Beau's mother is steering it, or perhaps more significantly, because Beau cannot see it going any other way. Before we get into the bigger picture of Beau is Afraid, I'm sure some of you clicked on this video for a more direct translation of the events of the movie. So what's up with the plot? We know from flashbacks and the cruel, inciting incident of Mona faking her own death that she was an abusive mother. She used manipulation, guilt tactics, love bombing, and sometimes physical abuse in order to control Beau. And in his childhood, these abusive behaviours culminated in one major event: the attic. In a flashback, we watch Beau being dragged from the bathroom to the attic for being defiant and disrespectful. But as the shot goes on, it reveals itself to be a point of view shot, and there are in fact two young boys in the bathroom. Which raises the ultimately kind of irrelevant question: does Beau have a twin? If you look at the film literally, I'm saying yes. Beau has a twin who was braver than him, and he was locked away for it. The POV shots, Beau being referred to as Mona's sole surviving son, and having a different actor credited as Beau's twin in the attic, all back this up. This is just as logical as anything else that happens here, so you can take it at face value and run with it. But to speak to the film's themes and recognise that the film on a whole is told through dreams and mythologies, we can understand that the twin that stands up to the mother and the twin that cowers in fear to be two halves of a whole. Beau's bravery and his weakness. And seeing his braver side punished taught his weak side never to do the same. Whether you see them as literal twins or not, the message doesn't change. Ambivalence feels relevant here because, as Cambridge describes it, it refers to the state of having two opposing feelings. This, in conjunction with Asta's quote on the film being about an unlived life, immediately makes me think of the twin in the attic. Perhaps these two Beaus are the greatest visualization of the film's central theme, the ambivalence embodied by two Beaus, one that feared and one that was brave, but both were sentenced to an unlived life, in the attic and in the world. The attic itself interests me as a concept, as it's a place where things are locked away, but for who? Is it Beau or Mona creating this mind palace of horrors? Ultimately, I've landed on seeing it as a liminal space shared by both of them and serving a different purpose to each. What Mona suppresses her own sexual and romantic past and an altercation with her momentarily audacious, disobedient son become the ghosts that haunt Beau. Her bad memories, her own struggles, her traumas become his fears. And that's generational trauma, baby. But Beau's brave half is far from the only thing in the attic. I was really struggling to read an introduction to this character, but when we finally make it to the attic with adult Beau, we discover his father. And he is quite literally a massive cock. YouTube, please don't demonetize this. This is educational. For many viewers, this reveal was quite the shock, because the film is already surreal and fantastical, but the phallic entity completely turns the corner into the abstract. I avoided all spoilers for this film, so I didn't know that it was coming. I'd also completely forgotten what this looked like, and in my head, it was way more like a little cutesy axolotl squishy toy. But it's horrifying. Mona tells Beau that this is his father, and we can take this in a few ways. One dark alternative is that Beau's conception was an assault, and that Mona sees the father not as a person, but as a violent act, something that she has locked away rather than dealt with, and that has greatly impacted the way she views and treats Beau. I haven't really seen anyone speak to this idea, and I don't think it's the intended meaning, but her backstory could be read this way, and it still makes sense. On a lighter note, you could take the form of the monster in the attic to mean that Beau's biological father was just a penis. Something casual, someone Mona didn't care for, someone maybe she didn't remember. No shame. Literally just a dismembered phallus unconnected to a man. But I think the general consensus driven by Mona's scornful attitude to Penis Dad was that the father was, metaphorically speaking, a massive dick. An arsehole, a tool, a cad, what have you. A man who didn't care enough for her and Beau to stick around and be a dad. Throughout Beau's life, Mona had trained him to believe that his father died after climaxing when he was conceived. But now knowing that he is alive, we can take this to mean that he was just an absent father. He was irrelevant after climaxing because he'd checked out. In Mona's eyes, he was dead to them. I think of the Penis Dad as almost a Frankenstein's monster, with Mona, the doctor who created him, but Beau being the one who is most frightened by him. This is not a very good metaphor, but it is to say that he is a monster to both of them, brought to life by Mona. He's Mona's monster, but he's Beau's monster. Does that make any sense? To Beau, the monster represents the abandonment by his father, but perhaps more significantly, his feelings of inadequacy on a whole. His life has been shaped by this fear of intimacy, based on believing that the men in his family have this genetic condition where busting one out kills them. This lie has stopped Beau from believing that he could have sex, love, a family, a home, all the things he really wants. Penis Dad epitomizes that on multiple levels. An absent father and a mythologized monster that curbed his ability to embrace physical and emotional intimacy. Bringing it back to the flashback where Bringing it back to the flashback where Beau's brave half or twin was thrown into the attic, we now know exactly what he found up there. He was confronted with the truth that their dad simply abandoned them, and this truth ended life as he knew it. The twin in the attic, who we meet towards the end of the film, experienced a life physically and emotionally malnourished, without Mona's care and only with the knowledge of their absent father, or possibly the presence of their absent father. But the presence of absence is still absence, I think. I love philosophy. Symbolically thinking of the two Beaus as one Beau whose defiance was punished with a painful truth, the part of Beau that remained in the attic and wasted away is a physical representation of how he lived his life after that traumatic event, finding out his father left them, chained up, still under Mona's watch, and unable to escape the looming presence of an evil penis. Haven't we all been there? Perhaps for Beau, the fear was easier to live with than the truth. Easier than holding the knowledge that his father simply walked away from him, so he chose to live with the fear instead. Living with fear isn't easy, but getting over it, as I well know, is even harder. So, the attic scene is incredibly pivotal, but there is even more to Beau is Afraid worth digging into. If you're bored of plot specifics, I'm going to put timestamps to the next section, as these scenes are less relevant to my central thesis. But otherwise, let's keep digging. One scene sees Beau discovering that near everyone he's met throughout the film, including the rowdy mob that ruined his home, are employees of his mother's company. In literal terms, she's been monitoring him, with the whole thing being under her orchestration. Her various businesses are also things we've seen throughout: medications, his apartment building, food products. So this is ridiculous and obviously serves as another metaphor. Mona is a pervasive, controlling, and inescapable force in his life, and his whole world traces back to her. All ways to coddle him, but all of that coddling and control stopped him from ever being able to step out of her shadow and to live his own life, to grow on his own. Moving swiftly on, there is another little mystery at play, which is that Beau is kind of looking for his dad throughout the film and meets a man at the play in the forest who says that he knew him and that he's still alive. And Beau thinks that this might be his father. I don't think it's his dad, because obviously we later meet the dad, Mr. Floppy. What is significant about this moment, however, is that Beau believes it to be his dad. Beau is looking for an explanation to solve his life's pain, for an answer to fix him, an answer he thinks he'll find in a loving father, the diametric opposition to a cruel mother. Given that we don't know who the dad is in this moment either, I think this plot thread mostly serves to put us in Beau's shoes, trying to connect all the red string when really there is none. And the play itself contains a lot of metaphorical mumbo-jumbo also, where Beau is on a journey home to his mother's funeral that ends tragically. The lead in the play is on a journey back home, but one that ends happily. And this is Beau's fantasy. The fantasy version of himself as a simple man in a happy community. And while he goes through hardship, he is rewarded in the end by reconnecting with his family. This is what Beau wants: to find a father, a wife, children. I think real Beau watching this play also speaks to the idea of him being an observer rather than an actor, literally taking action. It speaks to his inability to reach out to the world and become involved with it, as instead he watches it pass by, feeling false feelings aligned with fantasies. And as the scene concludes, the play and the safety of the theatre community is destroyed, like everything else, by his pre-existing fears and the chain of events that they set in motion. There is so much stuff in this film that can be analysed individually, but I think those are the key moments relevant to the concrete plot. So I'm gonna stop there. If you're trying to piece together an actual story as a literal interpretation of events, I think the closest we can get is this. Beau was a kid who had a twin and a controlling, abusive mother. Their dad was not dead, as she claimed, but a huge dick who she had punished for abandoning them by chaining him in the attic. She locked the twin away when he defied her, and he learnt the truth about their dad, but was now stuck in the attic forever without maternal care. She told people her other son had passed away and became even more protective over Beau. She also ran a pharmaceutical company, among other things, that employed a load of people who she used to spy on Beau to maintain control over him over the course of his life and to harass him in order to push himself to be better, which failed spectacularly. And then in the film, we see him trek to her funeral to discover that she has faked her death to test him, and it concludes with him failing to prove himself and suffering the ultimate punishment: death. That's it. But of course, that's not it, because that's kind of dumb. The plot itself makes sense in the way that a cynical, surreal drama makes sense. It's very Desperate Housewives. But the film isn't really about sense. In fact, it's trying to communicate the opposite. The most important thing you're supposed to get out of Beau is Afraid isn't a coherent narrative with signposted messaging. It's a feeling of utter dread and hopelessness. I'm so sweaty, the backs of my knees are sweating, and I'm just sitting down. I'm just sitting in a house. Lord of the Dance. Okay. Beau is Afraid paints an acute portrait of a mother who desires affection and controls her son by giving and withdrawing it. A mother who sees any disinterest in herself as a sign of disrespect. A mother who believes a lack of total compliance to be defiance. Astor said in an interview for Q with Tom Power that in creating the film he was thinking about parents and children and inheriting this world that is awful from parents, and there's an indignation about the children not being more grateful for it. And I think this sums up one of Mona's core traits. This feeling that she's done everything for Beau and that he hasn't been grateful. But her version of doing everything for him is to retain complete control. She can't fathom that the world she has constructed for him may actually have harmed him. Beau's mother figure is sadly, I'm sure, familiar to many. And without making the tone of this section really confusing, Patti LuPone slays this. She's so scary. And honestly, real Patti LuPone kind of scares me. I don't know if you guys have seen the interview clips of her and Aubrey Plaza together, but they both look so happy. They have the same evil energy, and I don't know, they shouldn't have been allowed to meet. They're too powerful together. But yeah. LuPone is an icon of musical theatre, and she brings a huge amount of authority and presence to this role that makes Mona feel very threatening and intimidating. And side note, as to whether the film is about Astor's own mother, he expressed that he doesn't mind the speculation because of course on some level it is. He said of filmmakers, I just think that everything is personal because it's coming from them. But whether Astor is meditating on personal grievances or not, I see the film as not one about motherhood thematically, rather one that uses this dynamic to carry his central argument. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to take away any substance that people who relate to this storyline and relationship have drawn from it. The mother's presence is integral to this specific version of the story, and I'm sure for many people this is the part of the film that had a massive impact. But Mona's main purpose here is as the root of Beau's fears. And there are probably other directions Astor could have gone down to create a similar staging for the message, be it a demeaning father, a cruel wife, a hateful child. In saying that, who better in a man's life to signify the one great terror from which all his other fears stem than the giver of his life itself, his mother. As I've said, the film is not supposed to have a logical, easily understood plot because the mania of it all adds to the meaning. The nonsensical nature of the story has to be understood as a feeling, not a thought process, and Mona is the same. Mona never changes or develops. She's a caricature of the evil maternal figure who manipulates, pressures, and shames her child. And I think it's almost undoubtedly intentional that we get no real sense that she's a nuanced person with any good qualities, because that prevents us from believing in inevitability. If there is hope, there is something to hold on to, then there may be a way out of the darkness. If Mona had a heart, Beau might be able to speak to it, but Mona's unshakable awfulness reassures Beau that he's completely at a loss. And while painful and heartbreaking, it's really important to the wider message that Bona, oh my god. And while painful and heartbreaking, it is really important that Mona gets the last word and that Beau dies unheard and unforgiven. I can't pretend to be serious after saying Bona. So, what is this greater message that I'm getting at? What is the point? The key to Beau is Afraid is understanding we're looking at how Beau sees the world, not that this is the world. But this is only the key, and what it unlocks is what the film actually wants you to take away from that, or maybe just what I want you to take away from that, because I love projecting. The ending of Beau is Afraid was at first incredibly unsatisfactory. Beau takes a boat away from his mother's house off onto a lake out into the middle of nowhere into a cave and eventually ends up in the center of an arena, on trial for his supposed crimes against his mother, a set piece that calls back to defending your life. And this trial does not go well for Beau. Mona really pounds home that he has been a terrible, ungrateful, intentionally cruel son, and all of Beau's rebuttals and pleas are rejected. He wants to escape the boat, but he can't, and in a sudden and final moment of cruelty, the motor explodes, flipping the boat and trapping Beau underneath to drown. But this unsatisfactory ending must exist in order for the overall experience to provide any kind of enlightenment. Because Beau is Afraid exists as a warning to anyone who sees the world as Beau does, who believes, as I have for many anxious years, that everything bad that could happen will happen. Beau shows us that believing in bad luck and conspiracies and your own anxious ideologies doesn't enable you to control them. Analyzing all of your fears, worries, and internal mysteries doesn't help you solve them. You just drown in them till you die. I don't want to get all cheesy, but I can't stress how much difficulty I have had with phobias and anxiety. And this movie was a genuine turning point because of how much it freaked me the f out. It made me realize that I was heading in the same direction as Beau. That if I believed that that terrible world existed, one where life is unkind and people are fundamentally cruel, then I'd inevitably live in it. Anxiety is complicated and a cure is never as easy as saying, just get on with it. And sadly, I do believe that if you look for cruelty and evil, you will find it. But the point is that you have to look. You have to frame it. In Beau is Afraid, we see his framing, Beau's point of view, and it feels like a ridiculous farce because it is. I saw in this how unbelievably nightmarish and surreal the realities of my anxious world would be, and was confronted with the fact that it feels unbelievable because it's not real. This is the only reading that I have developed or come across that makes sense of Beau's horrible demise. And as always, I would love to hear some opposing thoughts or different ideas about what it all means. But I would like to think that Asta wouldn't make a film where the main takeaway is that your mother's love is enough to smother you and that she was right all along. But from me to you, I see the message as this. Don't let the Beau in you get the best of you. You're going to die anyway, and your panic will not protect you. So you have to live your life with as much faith that the world is good as possible, because your perspective shapes everything. And I don't want to see Beau's world anymore. If you're looking for a streaming service to elevate your knowledge of cinema from around the globe, then Mubi is for you. Every film and their brilliant selection is hand-curated by Mubi's curators, and they're available to stream anywhere, anytime. If you're a frequent viewer of my channel, you'll know I make constant reference to Coralie Fargeat's Revenge. You may know her as the director of The Substance, and you can find both films streaming now on Mubi. You can try Mubi free for 30 days at mubi.com/girlonfilm. That's mubi.com/girlonfilm for a whole month of great cinema for free.